And we're back, Stripe Show podcast. Thank you for making us part of your day. It's an Instruction Thursday, and I'm fired up for this one. Been working on it for a while. We're going all things short game, in particularly putting, and joining me just happens to be one of the best at it, 8-time winner on the PGA Tour, part of NBC Sports, joining me from his studio there with, look at those putters, and those bags, and the backdrop there, Mr. Brad Faxon. Can't thank you enough for joining me.
Travis, thank you. I'm glad we finally got to put this together. It took a while.
Yeah, well, you know, my audience, they love a lot of things. They love all things golf, and of course, there's no shortage of storylines when it comes to professional golf these days. But what they really love is a little coach speak, you know, and looking at some video and breaking down not only what the best players in the world do, you know, but also some things that they can apply to their game. And you know, putting and short game is something that that they can do. You know, they can apply some of the things that we're going to talk about pretty easily to make more putts, develop their short game. And there's some things happening in today's game that I talk a lot about on the podcast, and I want to get your perspective, and we'll get into some of the specific strokes, you know, some of the things that we're seeing with Tony Finau, with kind of his unique approach now in putting. Scottie Scheffler, of course, is going through some things right now with his putting. And one of your students, Rory McIlroy, I want to talk about, getting an update on where he is as he tees it up out there in Pebble Beach. But I want to start with the Open Four. PGA Show was last week down in Orlando, and I actually watched it on the plane. I was flying in from the West Coast, and it was perfect timing. We took off, and the Open Forum started. And then when we landed, it ended. It was like absolute perfect timing. So I got to watch the whole thing. And I got to see you up there on the stage where you were with Joe Mayo. You were with James Ridyard, Parker McLaughlin, some others. And you guys really, you know, got into kind of some of the short game debate that's really been sparked from Joe and some of the work that he's done with Viktor Hovland. And I'll put up here for our audience. And we've talked about this, Brad. You know, this is the top one sequence when you look at Viktor. That's what he was doing before, saying like a, you know, a 20, 30, 40-yard shot. And then on the bottom, you can see a difference in how his upper center would really, you know, go left, and he would hit it with more shaft lean and those types of things, leading edge a little bit more on the ground versus some of the more modern instruction that you would hear from Ridyard and McLaughlin, which is, no, let's utilize the bounce. Let's make it a little bit cleaner at the bottom where we don't have to be as precise and get the leading edge off the ground. As you were up there, and I thought your perspective was great, and as you kind of reflect back on that discussion, I'm curious, what were some of your takeaways from that great debate that was at the Open Forum?
Travis, I've been lucky enough, or maybe unlucky enough, to go to the Open Forum. You know, the last few years going to the PGA Show, I've sat on a couple different panels, and this one I was not supposed to sit on. Chris Como kind of, I don't know if he strongly if I would sit up there while Mayo was up there, and also on the panel was Frederick from, you know, the head of TrackMan and head of Ping. So the guys that are there are much smarter than I am. You know, I'm kind of late to the game in this instructional side, and I certainly knew who Joe Mayo was before Viktor Hovland. I knew of his nickname, TrackMan Maestro, and how he learned to teach better. And Travis, I think that these top teachers that know so much, coaches, whatever you want to call them, they like to say, well, why guess when you can measure? When you it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways if you're going to try and measure somebody's swing and whatever it is that you're measuring. But I don't think we'd ever seen anyone before Mayo use TrackMan data for short game in the way that he did. And I mean, I admire what he did for Viktor Hovland. Hovland had been an incessant tinkerer with lots of coaches, kind of apologetic at how bad he was about the game, and really it was kind of fun to watch even when he didn't hit a good shot because he was so self-deprecating. But he kind of catapulted to one of the best short game players, and I think we saw that, and we did see it live at the Ryder Cup on the first hole when Hovland hit his chip shot from the right fringe, where he would have putted that 1,000 times out of 1,000 a couple of years ago, and he holed it to start, the Europeans' way to victory.
Mm-hmm.
I think what Mayo's done is he's made people think about the way you can hit chip shots with, like you said, a lot of shaft lean, sometimes 10 to 15 degrees of forward shaft lean, a double-digit angle of attack into the ground, using words like spin loft or vertical swing plane to help in his instruction. And I think, anybody that's hit a nice shot from the fringe, when they hit it low, when it's spinning and it gets lots of juice and checks up quickly on a dime, that's one of the sexiest shots in golf. And everybody wants to do that. And, we never knew things like launch angle under 30 until kind of recently in the golf world.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly equipment's changed a lot. And I think I mentioned on that panel, Travis, I'm 62, and when I first got on the tour, I still played a lot with Hubert Green and Seve Ballesteros and Raymond Floyd, Tom Kite, guys that had incredible short games with all kinds of technique that they had. And I know that Joe, with his "this is the way you have to do it," has really upset the instructors, coaches that are more normal. And I would put more normal with Parker McLaughlin, Brett Rumford, James Ridyard, who was up there as well, to James Siegman, where it wasn't so drastic. It was like, when you show these pictures of Victor, his head moves forward in the backswing almost a foot. It's a massive amount. And, Joe's, I think what his, one of his biggest points, Travis, is he doesn't see any chipper come to him that's hitting too far in front of the ball. It's always behind. It's always low points back. So he's trying to get center of mass, center of gravity of everything forward to hit that shot.
It feels, it's interesting, and the debate was really good. I thought it was handled really well with everyone up there. And I was really happy, actually, Brad, that you were up there, even though you didn't want to be, because, it's interesting in today's instruction world, and you mentioned, why guess if you can measure? And I think there's certainly a huge learning curve for myself and others when it comes to the measurement, and it's taught us so much. And Joe is a leader of that. But it almost, it feels like, and I was texting with a couple other teachers as I was flying watching this, it's like, are we pushing out great minds that maybe haven't measured in the past and maybe won't measure as much in the instinctual side of the game, right? Because just because you measure and you show it to a player doesn't always lead to better results in the future. And we're going to talk about a couple of those examples here a little bit into the show. Now, for Victor, it did. Victor, I think, needed to get a little steeper. I think Victor needed to have the conversation, perhaps, of a little more leading edge, and the examples of Jordan Spieth and Scottie Scheffler that maybe hit shots more like this. And so I think in Victor's situation, his analytical mind, maybe his thirst for knowledge, it fit. But I don't think every player is that way. And I feel like my question to you is, as you come out of your playing career and now you're an analyst and you're on these panels and you kind of see where our industry has gone from the outside, are we, just because one maybe can't speak to the number, can't speak to the lower and upper vector and spin loft and vertical swing plane, which is all great education, and maybe is not speaking in those terms, that voice is becoming less important. It's less valued perhaps to the industry because they're not speaking those terms, but yet we all know there's a balance to performance, and there's a lot of players that can't think that way and don't need all of that technical aspect or conversation.
there's, by the way, we're talking about short game, and you can do all this measuring and obviously the full swing and putting.
100%. Yeah.
To verify it. But the point I was trying to make is, if you look over the greats over a long time frame, there were so many styles that worked. And there's a certain artistry to it, isn't there? There's an imagination, creativity. And not once was that brought up on that panel discussion. So from
exactly
now into this coaching world, I'm still trying to figure out what's more important. And if I were going to speak on a topic, I'd like to say, like, my topic would be how to talk to a tour player. And I don't think there's many players like Victor Hovland that want to hear vertical swing plane or spin loft or angle of attack necessarily. Now, Victor has spent a lot of time with different instructors like Lucas Wald and Dana Dahlquist before he went to Mayo. I would say Justin Rose would be in that camp where he wants to see all the data. And I remember sitting at lunch with Rory after the Ryder Cup, and I showed him a video of Victor's pitching motion from behind, whereas you could actually see his head move forward. And Rory was like incredulous, like seeing that much. And I asked him, I said, do you want to measure your chipping numbers? He goes, I don't really have any interest in that. And this was soon after Rory, maybe one of the greatest chips you've ever seen at the Ryder Cup. Remember, left of 17, the par 3, kind of had that shot from below the level of the green on a little down slope and hit that low spinny shot without taking a divot. So there's different ways the great players like to think. And I'll tell you, just a few days ago, Travis, I went over to the Bears Club before Rory was going to go fly out to play this week at Pebble. And I just had my quad out. I was hitting some chip shots. I had the new SM10 58 degree. And I'm just kind of measuring my standard shot, trying to fly at 12 to 14 yards, see what my normal spin and angle of attack. And I'm in the 6, 7, 8 range. Trying to fly at 12 to 14 yards, was in the high 3000s in spin. And it was, right about 28, 29 launch angle. And Rory came out, and he had been busy with some calls. There was some stuff going on with the tour. And he took my wedge out, and he was totally different. His angle of attack was 4 and 5. His swing was much longer. The face was way more open at address. Club was steeper outside his hands in the backstroke. And a higher ball flight, 33, 34 launch angle, way more spin, high 4000s. And are you going to tell Rory McIlroy, who moved to third in the last year in strokes gained around the green, and tell him he's not correct?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think there's a lot of good points in there. One of them is your thoughts on most of the top players. They don't really want to get that deep into it, right? As far as the measurement and the breakdown, I think they see the value, and most of the coaches that are out there are able to provide that. And then I look at the open forum, and I look at, and I've been into those, and I look at the audience, and I see so many young teachers who are able to get into this education so early. Like when I got into the business 23, 24 years ago, like this wasn't launch monitors weren't happening yet. And so it's easy to kind of get up to speed now, I think, as a young teacher. And so I look at the open forum, and I know it's kind of, we can nerd out on a lot of this stuff and have that conversation, but so much of the conversation, Brad, is geared towards the PGA Tour player and not the amateur. And like, I talk with a lot of teachers, and I say, my advice to you is, yeah, you want to learn that stuff, but the most important thing you can do right now is get out there and teach and get reps and put your hands on people and move them, and make mistakes and do things right, but build relationships in the art of teaching. It's not about the measurement. It's about the art of teaching and getting results. All that's important. But I just feel like we're getting so far that way that I think we lose a little bit of the artistic side of it and the value, what is that you bring to the table, Brad, And I think so much of what has moved Rory forward, as you mentioned, your student Rory McIlroy over the last 6 years, him coming to you and really, I think, stabilizing his putter. He's become, I think, a much more instinctual putter. I think he's become a better statistical putter. And a lot of that isn't about the measurement, right, Brad? It's not about, hey, your path is this far back or your stroke is this far back and through, your club face is, your shaft lean is this at address and this at impact. You're not having that conversation, right? It's more around the process and maybe tapping into some of the feels that Rory's had. Take us back to when you first started Rory and where he is now with his flat stick.
You know, the first time I met Rory for a putting lesson was in March of 2018, right before Arnold Palmer's tournament, and it was Monday of the week when he was going up there. I had seen him a month earlier at the Seminole Pro Member, and Billy Andrade and I, who co-hosted the CBS Charity Classic Golf Tournament in Rhode Island for years, were hoping to get him to come play. And we had approached him, and he was so, he's just so genuine, and he politely said, I'll think about it, which probably meant that he wouldn't do it. And then a month later, I was playing in an event out in Newport Beach on the Champions Tour, and I got a call or a text actually from a 561 number I didn't have in my phone, and it was Rory just saying, "Hey, could you ever watch me hit some putts on Monday before I go up to Bay Hill?" And the funny thing is, I had booked flights to come home on Monday from LAX to Fort Lauderdale. I wasn't going to get back to my home here in Palm Beach Gardens until like 4 o'clock, so I wasn't going to be able to make it. So I changed my flight to take a red eye, which nobody likes to take those.
Mm-hmm.
Got home because I was excited. When you have an opportunity to maybe speak with and help one of the best players in the world, I took that seriously. And I got there, I was rested, and I knew he was working with Phil Kenyon for 3 years. I told him, look, I'm never going to say anything on social media. This is just you and I talking. And I think that kind of let him exhale a little bit, because he was going up that night and was going to see Phil the next day. And before Phil Kenyon, Rory had worked with Dave Stockton a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
Utley a little bit, and was absolutely a terrific player and probably a streaky putter. And there's no question in my mind, like Phil Kenyon knows way more about the details of the putting stroke than I do, the mechanics of the putting stroke. And I have no doubt in my mind that Phil was telling him things that were probably correct technique-wise. And look, Rory's the genius in all of this, Travis. But
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I needed to kind of unlock what was inside a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What could I help him with? I talked to his coach, Michael Bannon, who is his only swing coach he's had his whole career. A guy is one of his dad's close friends. And Michael had told me, look, he likes to give Rory 2 or 3 thoughts on a week off prior to him playing and let him figure out which one of those thoughts he wants to use. So I went with that kind of plan. And when I started to talk to him, it was apparent to me that he was like most of us do when we get bad at a part of the game. We're thinking a little bit too much about the mechanics. Things tend to slow down a little bit. Creativity and instinct kind of fall to the wayside. And I started just showing him, I said, look, it looks like a little bit maybe of reading the instruction manual on how to do this. And we talked a little bit about flow, letting the putter go a little bit sooner. And within, I hate to say within minutes because that sounds dramatic, but something emerged inside of him, that rhythmical athlete on the putting green. And it was really kind of like time to stop talking. And there wasn't much talk that day about mechanics. And I'll give you an example of why you've got to listen as much as you've got to speak. When I got there, Rory had said he wanted to go back to a 34-inch putter. He had been using a 33-inch putter for a few years. It was a putter that he had won his last major with. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You can use a 34-inch putter if that's what you want to do. And he talked a little bit about feeling a little bit more open and really locked in square. A lot of great putters were a little bit open. And that week, he went up to Bay Hill and had a kind of an off week tee to green. Well, I shouldn't say off week 2 days tee to green. And probably for the first time in a few years, shot lower than scores than how quality of how he hit it tee to green. And that's always a great feeling. Like when you get off the course and you feel like you stole one. And the opposite would be true when you hit it so good and you can't seem to get it in the hole. That's a frustrating way to play. You know, and Rory went on to win by 4 shots that week with some, he was in the top 10 that week, maybe top 5 in strokes gained putting. And, you know, these great hitters of the ball like Scottie Scheffler and Victor, they don't have to have Rahm. They don't have to be great putters week in, week out to be dominant.
Yeah, I played with Rory at the Arnold Palmer Invitational. It was before you guys started working. Raja Manor with MasterCard. I did a crash course with Raja to get him to be able to play with Rory. And Raja was kind of new to the game. And so I literally, Brad, spent 2 hours with him 2 days before and 2 hours the next day. And then we went and teed it up. And funny story, it was so cold that day. And we were standing up on the first tee. It was freezing. And we were up on the white tee. And I look back and I can see Rory back there. He's got his, he's just bottled up. You can just see his face. And he steps up and just nukes one around the corner. You know, I was like, man, this is going to be fun. Watching Rory all day, hit the driver. Raja steps up there. He got his driver and he kind of rolls it off the front. And I could kind of see, boy, this is going to be a long day, and so he's like, well, give me my 3-wood. And I was like, no. I was like, just take your 5-iron and let's just, because we've been doing a lot of 5-iron. Let's just get one down there. And Brady put a great swing on it. Bust his 5-iron down there about 165, 70 yards. He's like, well, we get up there. Give me my 3. No. I said, just let's just get some go. Let's just get going. Let's just hit a club we know how to hit. Brad, he rips it down there again. I mean, just a perfect 5-iron down there. And then I get him a wedge and he knocks it up there to like 4 feet and puts it in. And we go to the next hole. And I'm like, this is great. And we had a fun day and we had our ups and downs. But I talked to Rory about the 7th hole. We're walking off. And I said, hey, how's it going? With putting and this and that. And he's been working with Phil. And I love Phil. He's a friend of mine and he's a great teacher and he's helped so many in this. And Rory's like, man, I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about the technique and the measurement and all these things. But I don't, I think in the end, like what, you kind of look at some of the changes Rory made. I think they did go to the shorter putter and use more square. It felt like it was a little more of kind of an arc and those types of things, which I think historically, he would kind of, to your point, a little more open, kind of hold it off. It was very different than maybe some of the success that he's had in the past. And so, that technicality side and measurement, it has its place, right, in the game. We know that. And I often tell teachers, but it's not everything. Like, it's not everything. In fact, it's probably a smaller percentage than what you think it is, in the grand scheme of thing. Working with a 15 handicap, working with a 10 handicap. If you can't sit there and look at them and watch ball flight and look at some 2D video and basic patterns that you're seeing, and you can't get in there and move the needle, then you're probably in the wrong business, So measurement has a play. It has a place, but it's a small percent. And I think as Rory made those changes and he eventually kind of evolved, to you, Brad, it wasn't about measurement, right? It was about, like you said, tapping into that inner genius that so many of these players have. So it's an interesting conversation and one that we could go down a long time. But I look at some of the modern game players, Brad, and here's one that, I'm a little concerned with right now. It's this guy right here in Scottie Scheffler. I mean, this guy's struggling with his putting. And one of the questions I want to ask you is, I've been listening to Justin Thomas and how he's kind of got his game back on track. And he gave a really good interview yesterday, and he went back and watched a lot of his old stuff. Tiger came back. I think Chris Como did a brilliant job going back and looking at old stuff and how that inner genius. And when Scottie was struggling, Brad, I did just a full podcast on Scottie. I went back to when Scottie was putting the best. And I just put up video and pictures of Scottie when he was winning everything. And versus when he was struggling. And you look at the left and you look at the right and you just kind of start looking at, and there was a lot more pictures, Brad, of the old versus the new. And it was clear. Like you could see a clear difference in the way that he was going from impact to post impact. And so when I look at Scottie now and he's continuing to struggle and I look at the changes as he made, these are some wholesale changes, and you look at his setup and a lot of them are similar to what I think Rory kind of went through, and a little shorter putter, a little more over it. Forearms a little bit more in line. I think that putter head working on a little bit of an arc. Looks good. I love a lot of this stuff. If I had to build a model setup, this is probably where I would take it. But to me at the time, it felt riskier than considering how great he was on the left. When a player struggles, Brad, and they come to you, is that something you consider? Do you go back and look at, well, when you were a great putter or you're a great short game player, this is what you did versus now?
Well, 100%. And not only just looking at old film, but listening to what they have done when they've putted their best too. Scottie Scheffler has a lot of unusual things in his golf swing, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
You watch a player that's as good as there's ever been. There's things in there that you wouldn't and couldn't teach another player to do. And I think I would love to talk to Scottie Scheffler about putting. I know Randy Smith well, and I put Randy Smith in that old school camp like Butch Harmon. That's as much a sports psychologist as they are an instructor. And when I look at players and setups, I love what some of the stuff that I just saw with Scottie, but it doesn't look like Scottie. He doesn't look to me as comfortable over. Yeah, like that looks contrived looking to me from where he was. Certainly with a bigger grip there, the amount of incline he has over towards the ball. It doesn't look as, I don't know, relaxed, I think, as he did to me. I don't know that I would have found a tremendous, when I first started watching him play a few years ago, I didn't see a tremendous amount of things wrong technically with the stroke. What I would say technically, he has some peculiarities. The putter in the head of the club went out a little bit on his backstroke, but he did that on his chip shots too. And I just watched sometimes like the way players move around the green when they're reading and holding their putter, what they look like. But I don't think I could. I don't feel like I'm in a good position here to just say this is what Scottie needs to do.
Yeah.
Without having a conversation with him. Yeah.
I think where I'm going with it is that it's interesting with the narrative of modern instruction is if you're guessing if you're not measuring. And the reality is that I think we both agree, and I think most instructors would agree that most of these guys, they don't really necessarily want to be measured, and most amateurs, 15 handicap, 20 handicap, you're telling me you got to do a full measurement on all these people to move the needle? There's a place for it. But I'm just worried that we're moving down that path too rapidly, and to get to the numbers and to the ideal and to the measurement, right? Yes, there's a time and place for it, and it's helping people, but man, it feels I don't know, a little out of place at times. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do. And Scottie, man, I just, I look at the way he used to putt versus when he started struggling and what he's doing now. And I said it at the time, I was like, man, these are these are some wholesale changes. I mean, these are some wholesale changes.
I can tell you, I've gotten friendly with Stephen Sweeney, who's another top
Yeah.
player. He has a beautiful indoor studio close by to where I live, and a lot of the players like Shane Lowry that he teaches can go inside. And he's got Quintec, he's got gears for swing and putting. He's got video, of course. He can measure just about anything you want to measure. And the trick is, because I think I wanted to talk to Sweeney about ideas on teaching elite players, and he wanted to measure my stroke, and I still can putt pretty good, Travis. And
I'm sure
my numbers were really good. I had a bias that particular day to be hitting slightly on the toe side of my putter, and the putter traveled a little bit to the left after that. And these putts were still going in the hole. My numbers were really good. And the last couple of days when I went out to play, I was thinking about two things that I don't normally think about when I putt. And I putted really not as good as I normally do because I was thinking about some technique there. And I'm not faulting anybody for that. I'm not faulting Stephen. And I wasn't playing anything that mattered. But when Stephen asked me, what did you feel when you were putting your best? It's a really hard question sometimes for new players to think about something they did subconsciously and put it into, a language that somebody's going to understand, because the great players were just so good at doing this without really having to think about what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's going to be our challenge forever, isn't it? That's what. How do you keep that athlete inside while still helping them to improve their technique, or do they really need to improve technique?
Yeah.
That's going to be an age forever question.
It is. It's fascinating. It really is. I talk to a lot of teachers, and sometimes they'll confide in me, and sometimes they feel like I just let them go and just let them vent a little bit about, the ups and downs as a coach, because there's no perfect path. And there's so many brilliant teachers and what they know and the study of the game. There's no question it's advanced us. There's no question. But the art of it, right, in teaching and bringing back to reality, and you're working with a human being. And if the narrative is about the PGA Tour player, there's a genius inside already, right? It's already in there. So it's, how do you tap into that? And it's a sensitive thing, because it feels like that if you go in there and you make the wholesale changes, it's riskier. And sometimes you come out on the other end, but if you take that player down that path and it doesn't work, and you're measuring and you're quantifying, and they're not statistically a better putter, then they lose their confidence even more, right? I mean, now they've lost their confidence completely. And it's almost like, I use the analogy of, Sean Foley told me this analogy. He said, you take them down this path and you're walking up the bridge, and pretty soon you take them so far down this different path, and you go up the bridge and you look back and you're like, you can't see land anymore.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, we just got to keep walking. And eventually you're like, man, we're going to get to that top of that bridge. And you know what? We're going to start walking down the other side, and things are going to get easier. And eventually you're going to be able to see land on the other side. But there's always that moment as you're going down that path. And I feel like this is where we are with Scottie right now. And maybe even the next guy I'm going to show you, we're walking up that bridge and he's looking back. He's like, where the hell am I right now? Like, I can't maybe even remember what I used to do. That genius, because I look and feel so different, but yet you're telling me the numbers are good, right?
Yeah. And
now, Brad, I just, now you're in a tough spot. And every teacher's made this. Every teacher has made this. Every teacher's been there. If you've worked with these kinds of players, and even I would say, some amateur players, you've made this mistake, because it's not that perfect art. But I think the analogy is valid that Sean, he told me, was Man, you get up there close to the top of that bridge, man, you can't see land on either side. That's a stressful moment.
It's an uncomfortable place to be in. And, Scottie Scheffler was #1 in the world for 2 years, winning major championships. Statistically not putting well, but his comments were always like, I feel like I'm rolling it pretty well. I'm hitting good putts, and something's changed where I think he's felt like he's had to do something dramatic. And I don't know if that comes from himself, if that comes from Ted Scott, his caddy, from Randy, the whole team, his wife. You don't know what makes you want to make these wholesale changes. And maybe going down this path will get him back to a place where he's more comfortable. Because I think PGA Tour needs Scottie Scheffler.
Yes,
fun
sure do.
As a class person that he is, I think these players have had the ability to have conversations with other past greats, but all I know is I can't become a great coach if all I do is tell a student what I used to do, right? I have to help them, and that's been the biggest learning point for me is, okay, if I'm going to help someone, I can't just tell them this is what I do, just do what I do. And I think that's what most of the conversations, and like Ali Trevino, when he starts talking to these players at the father-son, he's really just showing off the shots that he used to hit. Coming up with,
he's the ultimate entertainer, right?
That's right. And it's fun, but I don't know if that really helps either.
Yeah. You know who I would go to dinner with if I was out there every single week? This guy. This guy is one of the best putters that I've ever watched, Denny McCarthy. And I had him on the podcast at the end of last year, and I said, you just look like you intimidate the daylights out of me just by the way you walk up to the ball. Like, you just look like a great putter. I mean, just swag and up to the green. And man, I mean, obviously he's got a great stroke, but it just absorbs it. You can feel it when you watch it and you're in his presence and he talks about it. Denny McCarthy, one of the great putters on the PGA Tour, and a great guy that I hope gets in the winner's circle. I really do. He's put on some good work with his swing. I know you run. You're playing golf today. I gotta ask you about one more person. Go ahead.
Talk about Dennis and
do it.
There's so much good in here, and you
okay.
Right out of the box when he looks like a horse where the gate is just opened and he's got to get out to a quick start, right? He looks like he can't wait to hit this putt. And one of the things I talk to my players about is this idea of continuous motion. And at no point in his entire routine here, as he stopped or as he stagnant, as he's still, feet are moving, hips are moving back and forth, fingers are moving, head's moving. The amount of attention, watch how many times he's looked at the target before he hits that. He has complete control of his imagery of where he wants his ball to go and where he wants it to start without having to have a tremendous amount of feels. Look at that. He's never still. Yeah. That's an athlete hitting a putt. I even love his head releases after impact. He's not trying to keep his eyes down, his eyes still, his head still. Everything about what Denny McCarthy does is what I would embody if you were trying to become a better putter. And I would show that to Scottie Scheffler and say, beat him.
Oh, man, like, you just look at, I got to pause here. I mean, look at that. It looks like he's walking on the beach. I mean, he is walking on the beach. He's so comfortable. And I mean, I said, you just intimidate the daylights out of me, and the way you just approach the ball. Like, you're in such freedom, and to your point, just continuous motion. I could watch this guy putt for hours.
And when he's walking up to the ball and see how his right hand's holding the grip end of the putter. I'm sure that the grip pressure there is on the light end. This is the instrument. This is how I do my work. I see a very right-sided stroke here, right feeling stroke when I watch him. It's beautiful.
Interesting. All right, last one here. So I had a little breakdown yesterday on the pod, or on Tuesday rather, And I just said, look, it's time for an intervention here for Tony. I cannot, Brad, watch Tony Finau putt like that on the left, what we've seen to this point. I mean, when you talk about rocking the boat in changes, in doing something dramatically different, and maybe he needs to go to this end of the extreme to reestablish middle ground. I don't know. But when I look at when Tony was at least statistically a middle of the pack putter on the PGA Tour, he was much more upright. Now you look at the right, he's had variation of the right hand grip, but Brad, he was much more, say, a la Brad Faxon, Steve Stricker, where the left wrist was, more unhinged per se, right? Versus a lot of angle in the left wrist, which then, puts that right forearm in a very different position. The hands to the body, very different position. Obviously, look at the toe of the club off the ground. I mean, I look at this and it feels desperate. And I don't, is it desperate at this point for Tony with the flat stick? Because what we saw, last week, man, if he just putts it all, he wins. He's such a brilliant ball striker. When you look at this, the difference between Tony on the right, Tony on the left, what comes to your mind?
I remember there was a great Japanese player when I grew up named Isao Aoki.
Yep.
Aoki putted with a bullseye-like looking putter. It wasn't a bullseye, but it was kind of almost heel shafted blade, where he had the toe way off the ground, his hands very low like that, and kind of a up and out pop stroke. And he was excellent at it. When you have a 6'4" guy like Tony with a shaft that flat and the ball so far away from him, it just looks like there's no way anybody could be consistent with a setup like that, and it makes you cringe.
It does.
Cringe a lot too, because he's, like you said, he's one of the greatest guys and easiest guys to pull for. The type of person he is, and yeah, I like his posture a lot better on the picture on the right. I mean, there's a lot going on there. And I'd love to find a way for players to make things simpler, not more difficult.
I think if there's one guy that needs to come talk to you, it's Tony.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I would love to talk to him. I would love to talk to Scottie Scheffler. I don't know that I could help them, but I could understand more why they're doing this stuff, I think. And you watch what this game does to some of the great players in the world.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's frustrating. And then it kind of makes you shake your head.
Sometimes people listen to the pod and they say, well, your critique and you're too harsh. I'm like, look, I'm half jokingly about this a little bit to some degree with Tony, because I like Tony. Boyd Summerhay is one of my favorite people in the industry. I mean, he is the salt of the earth, and so is Tony. And so I know it's frustrating for these guys, and I say it because, I just don't believe the picture on the left is what Tony Finau should be doing. And to see that is disheartening. And so it's like, okay, I joke that an intervention is needed here, and Tony needs to go back to how his best putting was, and it was much more upright, and these kinds of things that we see on the right. And I think that conversation applies to Scottie Scheffler too, and how that he was a genius and would be a much better putter. It's in there. And I think sometimes we, as a player and or even as a coach, we start going down a path where maybe the numbers are telling us to do this, or in some ways it's just desperation. We got to try something so different. You just hope that they can find their way back, because gosh, if Scottie Scheffler is an upper third putter on the PGA Tour, God, I'm on the record, Brad, saying he was going to win 5 or 6 times this year.
No doubt. And
I mean, he's that good.
Tony as well. And you mentioned Boyd Summerhay. When you think about the elite instructors now, and this kind of the new wave of instructors moving on from the Harmons, Boyd Summerhay, I mean, what he's done with his kids have fantastic.
Oh.
All the players that he's helped, he's got to be one of the smartest.
Phenomenal.
It's not just technique.
I agree. That's why I appreciate that out of Boyd. You know, his all his players look a little different, you know, and that's what, you know, Butch, I think, was very much about, right? They all looked different. And, you know, I mean, greatest teacher of all time wasn't out there just measuring every centimeter of the swing or the short game or the putting stroke, right? I mean, Tiger Woods, greatest player of all time, Jack Nick. I mean, they're not like, there's a place for it. I think it's moved our industry along, but I think your voice, and we'll finish with this, even though maybe you were reluctant to get up there because you couldn't explain the number of the, you know, spin loft, and that's not part of your, you know, your repertoire, your voice is still very much needed, you know, and, you know, I think we gotta keep that dialogue going, because it's not all about measurement.
Right. I mentioned Tom Kite early in the show. He was a guy that told me he was trying to find way. He was one of the first players that went to a 60-degree wedge. He was trying to find ways to take spin-off shots. Brett Rumford, who, I mean, he's the envy of everybody with a sand wedge, whether it's out of the rough or around a green. He said the same thing. He posted a couple of things. He actually was texting me while I was on the panel. I had asked him to send me a down the line pitch shot, and it was from 12 or 13 yards, and he holed it, you know, like you would expect. But it didn't look like it was going in there with a ton of spin. It just looked like what you would want to see, with a beautiful motion and a great tempo, and easy to repeat.
He got the blue man wrong, by the way. You know, I posted, you know, the blue man out there, the swing, and guess who it is? And I told you it was Smiley Kaufman, and a lot of people guess. And he sent me a DM and he says, "That's Alex Noren." I said, "Nope, it's Smiley." He's like, "Oh, yeah, okay." Yeah, I gotta get him on. I mean, he's a brilliant mind, and I love his approach. Brad, I know you got to go play golf. I can't thank you enough for joining us here on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Travis. Nice to be on the show with you.